During the writing of our book Ho komen kringen in it water, How do Ripples Appear in Water, Voya Reinboud and I came upon a number of ideas that coincide with important conceptions of the Stoics, in particular the oldest school of Stoicism, the early Stoic. We did this quite separately from the ideas of Zeno, Chrysippus, and other Stoics. These include ideas such as determinism, everything is material, and the idea that feelings are conclusions from earlier thought processes. We were able to glue on these Stoic ideas, as it were, and that is what we did in a few paragraphs. In the same book, we worked out an ethical theory, without calling it an ethical theory, which consisted of doing what is the best for the earth. In hindsight, we could have glued on part of the early Stoa ethics at this point, but I only noticed this later. As well as the Stoics, other ancient Greeks such as Democritus, Epicurus, Diogenes the Cynic, and the skeptics were sources of recognition and inspiration while writing Kringen. After publishing Hoe komen kringen in het water and the children's version of the same story, Het beste voor de aarde, the best for the earth. Why do these philosophers continued to fascinate and challenge me? Their ideas seemed to me to be worthy of more than a few paragraphs. I decided that one day I would write a book about them. That book is now here, at last. I have worked on these Stoic notes for more than 10 years, with many interruptions. Amongst all my activities, reading and writing about the Stoa was always on my list of jobs, often at the top of it, although the word Stoic is often used. For most people nowadays, the philosophy of the Stoics is unknown, particularly that of the early Stoa, which differs in a number of respects from that of the better-known Roman Stoics. I hope that with this book I can help to make the earlier version of Stoicism better known so that it can once again be seen as a rich source of inspiration for thinking and for everyday life, as it was for centuries in ancient times. Stoic philosophy can provide inspiration not just for our personal lives, but also for our political perspectives on society and the world. We do not need to embrace the entire Stoic philosophy in order to take a serious look at a number of ideas. I dedicate this book to my mother, who stimulated me to write from an early age, and my father, with his great interest for philosophy, in whose bookcase long ago I found a copy of willimprove. I would like to warmly thank all the people who have encouraged me by asking me year after year how far I was getting on with writing my book and when it would finally be ready. In particular, I would like to thank the people who actively helped me formulate my thoughts, including Tianneke de Groot and Metha de Vries, who provided several useful hints. Special thanks to Miriam van Ryan. I have obtained a lot from her insights and philosophical comments. Finally, I must not forget to mention my friend Voya Reinboud, who read at least 3 earlier versions of this book and provided comments, who filled in many details, who continued to encourage me with her enthusiasm, and to whom I often cried with despair about my Stoic book in an old-fashioned and unstoic way. The notorious year of 1968 and the turbulent years that followed it were times that I consciously took part in, and so I belong to the so-called protest generation. I find that funny, although of course this label is undeserved and says nothing about my contribution to the protests. The majority of that generation, after all, either did not protest at all or only about minor issues. They wanted a higher student grant or played the radio very loudly as a protest against complacency. They bleached their jeans and refused to comb their hair. But some went further and wanted a totally different society. Many people are full of courage and enthusiasm when they are young. They are full of expectations as they begin to strive for their ideals. They are optimistic and think they will soon be able to change the world. If this does not succeed after demonstrations and such like, discouragement often follows. I, too, have always extensively criticized the existing order and protested against a wide variety of things, and I have always dreamed of a different, better society. My circle of friends consisted largely of people who also criticized and protested and dreamed of and strove for a better society. Gradually, however, this group became smaller, while I continued to seek alternatives and became more consistent in my views about the state of the world. Is it possible to observe the state of the world and still be happy? sometimes more in the background. But during all these years is it possible to work for change without becoming discouraged? I think that ideas from the early Stoa can help to prevent a crippling disillusionment setting in. One of their ideas is about the phenomenon of anger. Left-wing movements, socialists, communists, anarchists, anti-globalists, utopians, feminists, anti-racists, and animal rights activists tend to think mostly in terms of conflict, and their motivating force is mostly a form of anger, namely outrage at inequality, i.e., over the possessiveness and egoism of a part of humanity. Radicalism increases in line with anger, or so it sometimes seems. But anger is not necessary for a movement aiming for a better world. Indeed, it is more likely to be damaging. With help from some early Stoa ideas, I hope to show that social change activity can be done well, indeed much better and more enjoyably, without this anger. Here is an example. Many years ago, in the time that I began to read about Stoicism, there was a violent meeting between radical left-wing activists and a group of extreme right-wing people. It is good that alert people warned, and still warn, about extreme right-wing movements and other bad developments, but it ended up with a lot of damage being caused by left-wing people, which the violent types considered a good thing. Others became furious about this, which in turn provoked yet more outrage. Then it struck me. What an improvement it would be if the anger could be completely abolished. Anger, from mild irritation to blind hatred, clearly ends up increasing misery after all. Can a Stoic form of social protest exist? One that is sober, well thought through, and not based on anger? Is a Stoic style of social revolution possible? In the last chapters, I will return to this question. This book is both about personal happiness and happiness in a broader sense. Building a better world. Whether these two goals are connected, and if so, in what manner, is covered in the last chapters of this book. In the meantime, in the 1970s, the slogan, "We demand happiness," appeared from time to time, painted on walls or written on bus shelters. I considered it one of the better slogans, because this phrase expressed the idea that you can do more than pursuing material interests and opposing a wide range of things. However, there is no right to happiness. Happiness cannot come from outside. With the right ingredients, i.e., with specific knowledge, you can create it yourself. Feelings are a consequence of earlier thoughts. That is one of the inspiring insights of the Stoics. This Stoic view on feelings and thoughts forms one of the most important themes of this book. Feeling and thinking seem to be two different ways of reacting, each with its own conclusion for action. The Stoics, however, saw feelings as judgments, therefore as thoughts or consequences of thoughts. If you look at it in these terms, feeling and thinking are two sides of the same coin. People who hide their feelings consider just one side of the coin and pay no attention to the thoughts lying behind the hidden feelings. Those who rely only on their feelings only consider the other side of the coin and are not aware that, just like others, the more rational types, they are in fact following specific ideas. Because of this, a lot of possibilities for improving personal lives, as well as political life, are lost. It is not through misfortune or calamity that people are prevented from doing what they need to do, but by their thoughts about it. That is one of the kernels of wisdom that follows from this Stoic view on feeling and thinking. The early Stoics found, incidentally, that they themselves were far from achieving Stoic wisdom. The only person they considered to have approached the Stoic ideal was Socrates, who they considered one of their predecessors. Another consequence of this view of feeling and thinking as two sides of the same coin is that someone can never be too rational. This would be like saying that reasoning is too logical or that a sum is too accurate. Being cold or distant is not rational, because if you are really rational, then you use not just your intellect but also your feelings, or more precisely, you process in a critical manner the ideas lying behind your feelings. Chapter 4 includes more about feelings and thinking in the early Stoa, and Chapter 7 includes a practical elaboration of these ideas. I have tried to maintain a clear use of words for concepts such as emotions and feelings. Mostly I use the word feelings, and I see strong feelings as a synonym for passions. When I mention strong feelings, in most cases I mean nagging feelings. This is not always mentioned in order to avoid long-windedness. I prefer not to use the word emotions, but it appears here and there in quotations, where it again means strong feelings. I also use the words affections or affectations for all feelings and moods, whether strong or not. Regarding honors, heat and cold, pleasure and pain. Fortitude is probably as old as humanity. Instead, as others have already done, I would like to advocate a more subtle interpretation of Stoicism. Fortitude often comes down to getting over something, pulling yourself together, acting tough and indifferent, hiding feelings. All of that is, in my opinion, far from Stoic. Stubbornness, indifference, toughness, honor, pride, and fear of losing face all play a role in this. Feelings and attitudes that are at odds with Stoicism as described by Zeno and other early Stoics. It is often thought that the Stoics wanted to banish all feelings, but that too appears not to be the case. In chapter 1, there is more about feelings and thoughts in the early Stoa. There are few original early Stoa texts remaining. What there is comes mostly from quotations from their opponents. You may well wonder how reliable they are. How much, then, remains of the original scope via these possibly inaccurate quotations? And that is without considering the issues of translation and interpretation. Living without passions sounds somewhat different to living without feelings. Appropriate action sounds very different to duties. Two ideas from Stoic ethics will play a key role in this book. Firstly, there is the already mentioned Stoic idea that feelings are judgments, with the corollary that passions are based on errors of thought. Secondly, there is the Stoic idea that happiness and doing good work go together. I still think daily about these notions. Say, as an example, I get agitated about a car which drives close to me through a big puddle. Sure enough, my feelings stem from particular judgments. The driver is an egocentric person who does not realize that by driving like this, a cyclist can get wet or covered in mud. Or maybe it is someone who does realize it but could not care less. It could even be someone who does it on purpose. All the same, none of these three cases gives me a reason to be agitated. What I can do is think about how the world could be changed so that this sort of thing does not happen anymore, and how I could devote myself to this cause. But is it within my abilities to ensure that the world changes like this immediately, here and now? No. That is something for the long term, and it will only succeed if lots and lots of people want the same thing. But maybe I can say or do something to make clear to the drencher what he or she has caused. In any case, what I can do is to try not to make a fool of myself because of this incident. I can avoid this by observing that it is simply the case, in this point in time, that many people drive cars, many of these people are in a hurry, many of these people do not pay attention to whether the car is spraying water, and some of these people feel a need to behave in an annoying manner and intentionally frustrate others. Getting angry or upset or feeling wronged does not help at all. By doing this, you only frustrate yourself and sometimes others too. Briefly getting wet because of a couple of large splashes is, of course, nothing compared to the damage caused to nature by vehicles' exhaust fumes. Should I get angry about this then? No, the same argument applies here too. It is surprising that something as interesting as this was thought of so long ago, but the fact that an idea was thought of long ago or in a faraway place does not by itself make an idea more valuable. It seems good to me to distinguish between historical interest, interesting that they said that in those days, and interest in the ideas themselves. How inspiring. Although I enjoy reading books about the first case, this book is primarily about the second case. Of course, there is sometimes a mixture of the two, but in any case, it is not for me to give a complete picture of Stoic philosophy. For a complete overview of Stoic philosophy, other books are available. I do not want to heap praise on the ancient philosophers. because I have also learned a lot from more recent thinkers. However, it remains the case that it was these old guys who really got me thinking. The ancient Greek philosophers were genuine freethinkers. Their theories are often extreme, which makes them clear and challenging. Some ideas remain inspiring and useful in daily life, even nowadays. It is sometimes said that it is not surprising that in the turbulent period after the death of Alexander the Great, 323 BC, different schools of philosophy sprang up, each in their own way seeking to attain peace of mind. To what extent there is a direct connection is difficult to establish, and for my project, it does not matter. I think that the world was a turbulent place in other times as well, and it is no less so today. Important parts of the Stoics' ideas have probably remained applicable right down the ages for people everywhere. Not appreciate Zeno's Cynic ideas, neglecting his Politeia or dismissing it as a youthful work. One Athenodorus, a bookshop owner in Pergamon, who was later friends with Cato the Younger, even removed all the passages from Zeno's books which he did not like. Luckily, he was discredited and the passages were replaced. A welcome bonus is that one Cassius, a skeptic, quoted these passages in indignation, so that it is possible to trace to some extent what was in Zeno's Politeia. Zeno's utopia is ambitious, but the basic principle that goodness, and therefore wisdom, can be learnt was maintained by later Stoics. The famous trio of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle also thought that way. Human evil, from that point of view, which I share, is actually only a type of failure and boils down to a lack of knowledge. Frugality, practicality, ideas about equality of all people, the cosmopolitan attitude and the honesty of the Cynics were all correct according to Zeno. But apparently he eventually felt something was missing. In contrast to the Cynics, Zeno was not averse to theory. He wanted to underpin ethics by using logic and physics. He became a pupil of another philosopher, Stilpo of Megara, and regularly visited the Academia, Academy, the building where Plato's philosophy was taught, where he followed lessons of Polemon and Xenocrates. He also visited Theophrastos, the successor to Aristotle. He could not have met Aristotle himself, as he was around 50 years older than Zeno and had already died before Zeno arrived in Athens. However, Zeno did not like the great metaphysical theories of Plato and Aristotle. One day he started out on his own, resulting in the philosophy that we nowadays call Stoicism. Because as a foreigner, he was not allowed to own buildings or land, he gave his lectures walking back and forth in the Stoa Poikile, a painted colonnade. According to Diogenes Laertius, he also did this to stop it becoming a gathering place for idle people, an Athenian hangout from 300 BC. Whether he managed to inspire street kids or their older equivalents, I have no idea. Some people suspect that Zeno was partly influenced by Asian thinkers. That is quite possible. Connections can indeed be made between Stoicism and Asian philosophies. Undoubtedly, people from different regions have always inspired and influenced each other. But at the same time, it is entirely possible that people in different times and places in the world can arrive at the same line of reasoning. Zeno clearly constructed his theories on epistemology, the theory of knowledge, and logic, partly under the influence of the thinkers already mentioned. His theory of nature relates back to that of Heraclitus, circa 530–470, to a large extent. Zeno appears to have gone to work pragmatically, free of ties to others' ideas. In the initial phase of Stoicism, there was plenty of space for criticism and controversy, both internal, such as the dropout Aristo described later, and with other schools of philosophy, for example with Arcesilaus from the Platonic Academia. For Zeno and his pupils, these critiques undoubtedly sparked a lot of internal discussion and adjustments of theories. From the book titles listed by Diogenes Laertius, it can be seen that Zeno was a multifaceted person. Here is a selection: on passions, on Greek education, on the universe, Pythagorean doctrines, general things, on poetical readings, Homeric problems, solutions and refutations, ethics. According to stories, Zeno died as befits a Stoic, without protest, fear, or lamentation. One day, when leaving his school, he tripped over and broke his toe. He quoted an appropriate line of poetry, then held his breath and died. In any case, Zeno was highly Stoic theory, consisted of far more than the practical ethical ideas, which I largely restrict myself to in this book. The early Stoics compared philosophy to an orchard. Logic they saw as the enclosure, physics as the trees, and ethics as the fruit. Ethics, according to them, therefore arose from the other components of Stoic philosophy, physics and logic. Their concept of logic was very broad. Epistemology, theory of knowledge, was an important part of it. Although parts of this physics, logic, and epistemology remain interesting, I find quite a lot of it not very robust. I also do not need to use most of it in order to arrive at an ethical theory that is very similar to that of the early Stoics. Nevertheless, in this chapter, I would like to give a brief sketch of these components of the Stoic orchard. The core ideas of it are: the universe is a closed and eternal cyclical system. Everything is material, including the soul. The universe is permeated with rationality, and everything that occurs in it has some purpose. Chrysippus said that bedbugs were useful because they wake us up, as are mice, because they prompt us to be tidy.